Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Steve Burns with Crawford Software, and today we'll be sharing some of the new features in Epicor ERP 10 supply chain area, and I'm joined by our founder and president, Steve Carr, and Steve will be taking us through some of those new features. Some folks are still logging in. What I'll do is start off with a simple poll, and just take a minute and give us your feedback. We'll let that run for a little bit. It's a question of basically what version of Epicor are you currently running. And also, for some housekeeping, a quick reminder that if you'd like to ask a question, there is a question area, or you can send direct to me via the chat feature that is provided as well. So we'll be back in just a minute and share some of those poll results. Great. Looks like most everybody has answered that poll question. I'll go ahead and close that. And why don't we take a minute to share those results so you can see those results, and then I'll give you a little background on Crawford Software. So Crawford Software has been an Epicor partner for almost 10 years, and we've worked with companies of all sizes to help implement Epicor. And these days we're doing a lot of upgrade work to Epicor ERP 10. And we've got specific expertise in many of the more complex areas of the tool, such as supply chain. And that is what Steve will be taking us through today. But as you can see, we've been a partner for a very long time. We have about 35 consultants nationwide, and our certifications go all the way back to Vista and Vantage, all the way up through 9 and 10. So it is something, the certification process is something that certainly we take very seriously. Steve Carr has led this company since its inception in 2001 and is still involved in customer projects, as well as performing many speaking engagements on the topic of enterprise resource planning. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Steve for our presentation today. Steve?
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time. I know maybe not the most convenient time, lunchtime, but it seems to be convenient for this, but it does defer everyone from their lunch hour. So just going to walk you through a little bit of the presentation here. So my intention is not to bring you through everything here. So let me just kind of go back to the first one. So today's agenda, we have a session review. We'll go through and what the expectations are, some of the details behind the scenes here and everything that I'm doing. Then we're going to go into a little bit more detailed discussion on the minimum, maximum, and safety stock calculation and update process. Go into a deeper dive on planning contracts. Then we'll touch on some of the couple of new features that are available with supplier maintenance, new feature in the generate PO suggestions. Same for some new features that are available in the MRP process. Multi-job scheduling board, and then talk about some of the new functionality that is in lot control. And then those are all each an individual slide, in some cases 2 or 3 slides, trying to give you a very detailed analysis, excuse me, overview on items like the minimum, maximum stock and how that works without actually doing a training, but give you enough that you understand what the functionality and capability is and how it's going to work for you going forward. Same thing with planning contracts. So, and then those additional features are just some of the report enhancements, smaller bullet items that really don't require a lot of explanation. Just having that one little one-liner up there can give an explanation and go through it. All right. So today's session, as I said, it's really just going through some of the new features and functionality that are available in Epicor 10.1 compared to Epicor ERP 9. The same things that I'm talking about here, excuse me, are going to be applicable as far as differences between Vantage Vista and Epicor 10.1, but we're not going to go back into reviewing items that came out new with functionality in ERP 9 or Epicor 9, such as co-part salvage and some of the other functionality there. We're really just trying to functionality-wise focus on Epicor ERP 10.1 and specifically try to stay inside the supply chain area. We actually do have a couple more webinars that will be coming up later this year that are going to go into customer service, finance, and other areas in more detail. This review is not going to be a review of every single new feature and functionality that is there. Really try to focus in on areas that are what we consider a big win for customers, getting the most new functionality, things you can actually use and go through. A lot of these things that are there as far as new reports, we'll mention them and we'll talk about them, but you're going to see them anyway, and they're great new features and the new functionality as far as being able to help, but they're not actually giving you new tools to work with to help you improve the supply chain, improve your business processes, increase inventory accuracy, increase inventory turns, everything that you want to do as far as a business to grow and become more profitable. Excuse me. The session is not going to be covering anything as far as Epicor ERP 10.2. That has just started to come out. We're going through that. We'll do the same type of a features and review process a little bit later in the year or the beginning of next year. I can't believe we're ready to say 2018 already, but we're not going to be covering that functionality right now. Everything that you're seeing as far as the examples and the screens are from our internal Epicor 10.1.600. I think we're at 600.8. I actually did forget to get the last dot in there, but I believe that's the release we're at the time these screen prints were done, and everything is there for functionality. And you'll see as we go through the presentation, try to actually get into very good screenshots that show you where that functionality is and how it's set up. In this short session that we have here, being an hour or so long, with question and answers, probably half an hour to 35 minutes that we actually have during the presentation, we just couldn't do an interactive going through and actually logging into the system and step-by-step walkthrough. That's more of a training exercise, but definitely happy to ask individual questions, and we can try and do that on a separate one-on-one conversation with people if there are some. The last thing that I would ask is that if you do have any comments or any questions about specific functionality, things that maybe I could have covered a little bit more, or things that we didn't cover and you've heard of, please put them in the window in the chat room. We can definitely schedule another webinar like this if there's a lot of requests for that same type of review, or even reach out and maybe do a one-on-one conversation with someone if it's just a little group that wants to have that conversation and go through it. All right. With that, we'll start getting into some of the functionality and hopefully answer some questions for people and make it a worthwhile endeavor to consider upgrading. The first one we wanted to talk about was the calculate minimum, maximum, and safety stock. And what I'm doing here, this is an entire process. I'm starting with the first level of the foundation of the building blocks for that, which is the part class. So in the part class, there's been new fields. They're all highlighted down here in the bottom section of the screen, right in this area here. And this whole section is all new to the part class if you compare it to your 9 or anything else for that. And giving you a high-level summary of what those are, the first one is the include in calculation. That's saying this part class should be included during the process for calculating a minimum, maximum, lead time, and safety stock. The next part that we're looking at as far as a checkbox is the include in sales history. That's basically, do I want to include sales that have happened during the history window, which is the field over here to the right. So that history window you're saying in number of days, am I looking at 180 days? Am I looking at a year, 365 days? What period of time do you want the engine to include when it's going through this process of making these calculations for you and determinations? So the include sales history is for this part class. Let's say I was on raw materials. Do I want to include sales history? For raw materials, you might not want to, because what sales orders those raw materials might have been included on were an anomaly, and you don't want to really trend for them. You don't want to have a safety stock that's calculated based on those anomalies. You just want it to be on the checkbox below, just the job materials. So what has been issued to a job and gone through that process. If you're looking at a finished good material, it might be the exact opposite, where you only want to include the sales history because that's really what you're driving to. You expect to sell those finished goods and those finished units. The anomalies are coming into play for a rework job or something like that, so you might want to exclude those. So depending on how you set this up is what type of history gets factored into for the consumption or the usage during that history window that you defined. Okay? That safety factor, once the system has gone through the process and it calculates out a minimum quantity recommendation, what's the safety factor that you want to use? So what's the factor? Is it a 5? Is it a 2? What do you want the system to apply to that calculated minimum quantity to make a suggested safety stock number to put into the part master? That same type of logic is what's coming up for the max factor, which sounds like makeup. I apologize, I didn't do that. But what's the factor that's applied to that minimum on hand value to calculate a new maximum on hand value? So it's adding the minimum on hand, the safety stock, and then applying a factor to it, the max factor, and coming up with a recommendation for a new maximum value, maximum quantity on hand. Okay? So that's the first place where these new fields are coming into play, is on the part class itself. If we move forward on the individual part master at the site level, and it's key to note that these are site level fields, so they're not something you're setting at the part in a central level. You're setting them in the part site level detail. So you can have different values and different setups for multi-site if you're a multi-site installation. Most of the fields are already repeated. They're down here in the lower left corner. I had to make sure I got my right and left right. And you're looking at those, and they're very similar. And these values on the part master can serve as an override. So we've got the history window, we've got the safety factor, and we've got the max factor, again, along with those included in sales history or include the job materials. The one thing that's a little bit different is the exclude calculation. If you remember on the prior screen, we had include. Now it's exclude. So on the part class, you set raw materials, and everything that has an ROH or an ROW, depending on which way you set up your raw materials, as the part class definition, they're going to get included in the functioning and the calculation process. But if there's certain raw materials, they're coming near end of life, they're fading out, whatever's happening with it, you don't want these numbers to change. You've got them set to really low values, they're no longer a trending material, etc. You can exclude those, and that's just going to eliminate some of the noise that might come through in the resulting out process that you'll see from the calculation. And it's just to help it make it a little easier to work with and come through. All right. So when you look at the calculate min-max safety stock, the mass update, that's actually, it says mass update, that's the menu choice, but it's actually all steps in one. So what you're doing in this process when you're getting into this is you first get into this screen, you're going to be able to use the binoculars to do a find, and you're going to find part classes. Or if you know it, you can already go ahead and select it. But in this case, I chose just the part class aluminum. And that's all that this part ran for. So what happened was once I selected aluminum as the part class, the system went out and identified every part master that had a class ID of aluminum that did not have that secondary flag set on the site level to say exclude. And it brought it into this grid display, RXL, whichever terminology you're used to using. What you're seeing on this right now is in the minimum, maximum, and safety, if I had just run this process and I'd done nothing else, those are basically, those shouldn't say basically, those are the values that are on the part master right now. So I pulled in that site level detail and is displaying what's there. The next process, what you're doing is you're selecting, using the boxes here, and you select the parts that you want to have included in the process. You can select all, deselect all, which is a clear all, etc. But basically you're selecting the ones that you want to have, and then you identify and say calculate. Myself, I tend to usually just go select all and calculate selected because it'll calculate them all. The reason why I'm comfortable doing that is there's no updates happening at this time. They're just proposed values. So after you do that, select the item that you want to do, and you do the calculate selected, what happens is these proposed values are populated. So now you see there's a proposed minimum. So right now, for this part, the safety stock one that we did for a test, it's got a safety minimum of 300, 0 max, and a safety stock of 0. After I ran through the process to calculate, it came up with and said 18 is what I would propose as the new minimum on hand, 41 is the new maximum, and safety stock of 5. Again, those are proposed. That's the thing that you want to be able to make sure you're aware of and you're monitoring as you go through this, because the next level of functionality is where you're having full control to be able to decide what gets moved over. So I didn't put a screen print of the part detail. We can call that up and show it to someone on an offline session if you'd wanted to, or if you've got 10.1 installed, you can take a look at it on your own. But basically what's happening is you have the ability to copy just the safety value, just the minimum quantity, the maximum quantity, both the minimum and the maximum, or copy them all. It's going to take these values that are in the proposed column right here and move them into, basically, this is the part master. And when you save, whatever's in here is going to get updated back to the part master if it's changed. And the reason why I say you have full control is you can say copy all. This 18, 41, and 5 would get loaded into these 3 values here, but you notice it is a maintainable field. I can still make changes. So let's say for whatever reason you want even numbers across the board. You don't like these weird calculations. You know, you could propose the 18, 41, and 5, have them copied over, and manually do something to make them 20, 42, whatever you want to do. The whole thing to understand is it is up until the time you hit save, even though it says mass update in the screen print and that's how it looks, it's actually not doing any changes until you make the decision consciously to change them. Okay? Hopefully that explained that pretty well. If there's questions about it, we'll be happy to talk about them at the end of the webinar and go through it. After that, I'm going to go ahead and move into planning contracts. So planning contracts is another big piece of functionality that's been added with Epicor 10. And this is giving you the capability for long lead times and do some additional planning, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. But basically, it's a central point where I'm linking all of my demand and supply to that planning contract. Excuse me, all the sales orders, purchase orders, transfers, new PO suggestions, or the job itself or the job materials itself can all be linked to a planning contract, and we'll show you where that link is in a couple of slides coming up shortly. When you do this, any of the demand that's linked to that planning contract is subsequently going to be filled by the supply that is linked to that planning contract. So that's your netting process. Everything's funneling through the planning contract and doing the net off and calculations there. Planning contracts can also be used to enter future demand or future requirements or a planned independent requirement, and we have a screenshot and we'll walk through that in more detail shortly. And the planning contract itself becomes an inventory location, and we'll show you that in another screen. I didn't pull up an actual one to show you a bin. Again, that's something we can go into in more detail because there's not a lot of detail there. If you've already worked in warehouse bin, there's one additional radio button that says contract. If you've worked with it in 9, you've seen the customer managed inventory, the supplier managed inventory, radio buttons are there. They added another one for contract now to identify that this bin is a contract bin or a planning contract bin, to use the full wording. All right. The first step in the process is actually to do the planning contract maintenance itself. You've got the contract number, that's just a field, whatever you want to type in as far as going through it, and a description. Those are pretty straightforward. You're linking a planner and you're linking a buyer, and that's just for in the suggestions and all the other pieces that go through to it as far as the grouping. The inventory location down here near the bottom, right in here, and the bin. This is the default warehouse and bin for all inventory transactions related to this planning contract. Now the rules that come into play is the warehouse cannot be selected unless it has at least one bin. So when you pull on the drop down, that warehouse, in this case I created one specifically for planning contracts, But let's say my inventory, my warehouse was main, typical default that we see a lot of customers. That warehouse main, if there were no bins that had been identified as a contract bin, it actually wouldn't be available in that drop down to select from. Same thing is happening with the receiving locations. This receiving location is, again, what is the default that's proposed during any of the receipt transactions where the supply is linked to this particular planning contract. And hopefully that made some sense. As you can see, what we did in our examples here is I created a warehouse specific for planning contract inventory, and then I started making my bin numbers intelligent to each planning contract. To me, it's just a nice visual to see it and have that link and know that's where my go-ins and go-outs are all happening tied to that one particular item. The other thing that you're seeing on the screen here is the planning contract bin actions. What we're trying to do and what they're trying to control here is if you're going across a contract, so if you go and take inventory from planning contract 2 and try to use it to fulfill planning contract 1, or you try to take inventory where I've got it saying it should all come out of this planning contract bin, but I try to take it out of main stock. This actually used to be a problem before, and the system had some very strict system when we saw the precursor to the initial release. And now they've given you the capability to identify this. Is it a warning, or are we not concerned about it? There's 3 pull downs that are coming up into play there. The big thing is you're controlling, is it allowed, not allowed, or is it a hard error, and et cetera, going through. And the same thing is for outside transactions. It's just basically for each one of these, what does the system do? Does it give you a pop-up warning, or does it give you a hard error and you basically have to change the transaction and you stop it? A good way to have it be an error is that's how you're isolating inventory from being pulled. That gives you that planning contract 001, that PC-001. By setting them to errors instead of warnings, that inventory is segregated, and the system is, without someone coming back in here and updating the planning contract itself, is not going to let you move inventory between planning contract 1 and planning contract 2. So you're getting that isolation, you're reserving your inventory, which is what we have a bigger concern with most people. Okay. We have a couple other tabs here on the screen, the demand, the supply, and the transactions. Those are just display screens, and they're just basically going to show you in the demand or the supply tab any of those that are associated through the link process to this planning contract. Okay? All right. So for long lead time items, this is what we had talked about, being able to create that future requirement, that future demand, or a planned independent requirement. In this process, you're creating a new line, and in that line, you're identifying what is the part number. The description obviously comes in from the part number itself. What is the quantity, and when is it due? This is now, once you approve, that's a key thing to remember. You need to approve the planning contract, which is on the header screen. That's the approved checkbox in the upper right that was there. Once you approve it, this starts to drive MRP. So now if you've got that casting or something else that takes 6 months, and you know the job's going to go through an engineering process, and it's going to be another 3 months in engineering, but I need to get that cast, which is not going to change. I need to get that ordered now in order to be able to meet the planned start date and complete the project on time. You can create the demand for that casting, link it to that planning contract, have the due date when you need it to be in here, and it starts driving everything that's required to either manufacture it, purchase it, whatever you're doing. And as the real demand is put in place for the system, if you have multiple jobs, it's going to consume it. So consider it much like you would do with a forecast with a sales order consuming it. This is a forecast for demand, and as you create the actual demand, it's consumed and reduced and replaced by the real. So you don't get in that situation where I put up a planned requirement for 10, and then as I start adding it, it adds more to it, and all of a sudden I'm ordering 20 when I only needed 10. Hopefully that made sense. All right. The other thing that's going on is in all those places that I'd mentioned earlier, there's now a new a checkbox button that has been added for link to contract, and then an actual place to put in the contract. So this is the final piece that actually brings it together. On the sales order line, if this line is supposed to be fulfilled or tied to a particular contract, then you would link it to the contract by setting that indicator and then putting the contract ID here. In our case, it's that PC-00001. If you set the link to contract, it doesn't force you to put a contract ID in, but there is no link between these two. There's no tie unless that contract ID is filled in. And again, on this, we're just giving you the idea. Here's all the places where it does get prompted for and where you can fill it in. Okay? All right, moving on to the next item. Supplier Maintenance has a couple of new fields that were added to it, new data elements. We have a ship via. That ship via is now being passed through to all new purchase orders created. So, small feature, but it's a nice feature to have. The supplier due date horizon is also new to the system with 10s, and that's taking out and that's putting that planning horizon out there for a particular supplier and for their particular purchase orders. So if their purchase order release due date happens to go past the 12-day horizon, that's when the scheduling engine starts to consider it to be a late and starts making recommendations, starts putting it into the overlord and different things like that. This is a deeper subject. It's not one that's very easy to cover in this short little session we had, especially where we spent some time going through the other ones in more detail. This might be a good one if people are interested to talk more about in detail where the supplier due date horizon comes into play and how that ties into the scheduling engine, along with some of the other features that we're going to highlight in the next couple of slides going through. But again, if you're familiar with the process, it's probably very clear to you. If you're not, it would take a little time to go through it together as a group and go through. Okay. Moving on, in the generate purchasing suggestions, there's now that capability to add filters. So you've got now the part itself, the part master, part class, and product group. And those are new filters, so you can narrow down the focus on what am I creating new generated PO suggestions for. Usually that capability to do an ad hoc run in the middle of the day and generate PO suggestions for things that might have happened in the morning. So that midday run where it's not going to be a long impact, it's not going to change everything that's out there, it's just going to go after some certain specific targeted areas that you know you need to react to, similar to what you would do with maybe a midday MRP net change versus a regenerative planning on a regular basis. Okay. Speaking of MRP, it's a nice segue. MRP Processing also has that same capability now where they've added more filters to the process, where we have the same thing, part class, and product group. And again, just like any other selection criteria inside of Epicor ERP, you can pick one or multiples. The nice thing about the part one is now I can go ahead and I get a really big order for that new sales part. I can go ahead and run MRP just for that part and see the net impact without necessarily juggling the entire system by midday trying to run a full regen or just a full MRP during the middle of the day where people might still be reacting to things. I can focus in on that one particular item and go through it. Good way to react to changes with phase in, phase out. If you're discontinuing a part and you're doing replacements or different things, being able to focus in on that and make those changes during the day and react to them, not make the changes during the day, do a full MRP run overnight, and then come in tomorrow morning and find out you have a whole ton of cleanup to do. All right. Moving forward, another functionality that we like a lot in the new 10s releases is the multi-job scheduling. This is giving you the capability to pull in a group of jobs into the job scheduling board. And I know it doesn't make sense that I have the job entry screen here, but it'll make sense in a minute. But when you're in the job scheduling board, you've always had the capability to pull in 3 or 4 jobs and work on each one independently and bring them forward. What we're getting now is the capability to flag a group of jobs together and basically make an adjustment to one and have it impact everything. So slide the entire group together. So if you have a large assembly with multiple sub-assemblies and multiple jobs in those sub-assemblies, you can pull that little tree together, if you will, into the job scheduling board and make adjustments to all of it and just have a nice what-if situation that moves the entire thing in one large group versus trying to remember, okay, I changed job 1, now let me go find subassembly 3, subassembly 7, and tying them all together. So that's a very good feature to be able to group things together and do that what if and move everything in unison together. The other thing that's happened is when you're doing this, and this is the reason why we have the job entry screen here, actually setting the indicator that you want to do them as a multi-job is happening on the job entry screen. So typically an example would be go ahead and do the job scheduling board, pull all the jobs in together that you want to work on, go into job entry from there for each one, and when you do this action schedule, you get the new pop-up and you're seeing the 2 additional fields that are coming in here along with the ignore locks is schedule, multi-job, and then a drop-down on how do you want them to react. So schedule multi-job says, I'm linking it together. When I do job, all jobs, you're moving everything. So whether it's a predecessor or a successor, as you move one, they're all, if they're linked together and they're tied together, they're all going to move at the same time. The successor job means I'm going to move job 3, and only everything that comes after that tied to it, my job 3, but only everything that comes after it, the successors, are going to be moved. And job predecessors is obviously just the opposite. If I move job 3, it's only going to move job 1 and 2 in that sequence. And again, trying to give an overview of the functionality here without having a lot of time to go into a very deep dive, something we're happy to have an offline discussion with anyone if they want to go through it separately. Okay. Moving on, lock control has some nice new functionality and features that if you're familiar with where this is in the company configuration, you might remember that this attribute section over here was about all you had on this screen. I shouldn't say about, it is all you had on the screen. And it was just a series of radio checkboxes, and you basically turn them on or you turn them off. So what we've done now and what you've got new features and functionality for is those attributes now can be identified as mandatory, tracked, or not tracked. So they're no longer just on or off. You've got some flexibility, and not tracked gives you that capability to have them there or not have them there. So tracked, they're there, but entry is not required. Not tracked, they're not there at all. It goes away. Over to the left of that area, the defer lot attribute entry, when you're setting these checkboxes, you now have the capability that during the inspection process, I can defer, and I don't want to collect those attributes. I don't need them at that point in time. I know that's probably inspection was the worst example I could have picked up for all of those, but it exemplifies the point. And it gives that features there, and you've got them for pretty much every type of inventory transaction that's out there where you might be prompted to enter a lot information. And then job receipts to inventory. This is actually the biggest one. It seems like the simplest. It's just one little checkbox, but I know we have a lot of customers that are already doing this. So setting this indicator now, during the job receipts to inventory process, it says it right there, use job number as lot default. I know a lot of our customers out there, they are using the job number as the lot number. They've got procedures in place to manually make sure it's typed in and all these other things, or they've written a BPM. Now the system has it, and it's already set up. And if you have that checkbox indicator set, when you do the job receipt process, the default lot number will be the job number, as long as on the part master you set it to a non-part specific lot sequence, and the global lot sequence has been defined. Okay. Moving on to the next one. I think we're doing okay on time. We're actually pretty much wrapping up right about now anyway. So some of the other features that are there, bill of material, zero quantity. You now have that capability to enter a 0 on the bill of material, and it works. Before it was always a hard error, and people were trying to put that 0.000000 whatever lowest denomination they could. The engineering workbench, this is just one of those efficiency ones that you can approve and check in all with one checkbox, so you don't have to go in and approve all, then check in all. The job tracker has some improved visibility to go to sub-assemblies and lower levels for the costing information. The job scheduling board along with what we had talked about earlier as far as grouping and moving jobs together, they've also brought in all the flags to do the minimize WIP process. You saw it in one of the screens that I'd shown earlier, the ignore locks. So there is capability to override and ignore the locks. So everyone has that right-click on it, lock the schedule, it's set. Well, there's checkboxes to avoid that, but that's a different discussion. And then you can also have the system recalculate the expected yield during that process. On the buyer workbench, new field deviation quantity, that's just basically showing you between what the supplier's ordered quantity is and what's been received. And you can add that into the workbench for some quick viewing information. Time phase inquiry, I was actually kind of happy about this one. Time phase now supports multiple parts. So no more relying on the inheritance of that if you were in the part master and you open the time phase, that they would be tied together and keep refreshing, or call up part A, then call up part B, or remember to do the control shift and click on it to open two of them. Now you can pick 4 or 5 parts at the same time. It works. It gives you a display of a tree view, and you can just move between them and going through. The Kanban process for the monitoring and the visuals is basically the safety stock has been added. There's a whole new color code scheme that's been included in there, but it does call out a safety stock delineation in its own coloring block to go from there. Manufacturing lead time, you can now have a receiving lead time for the subcontractor. So you've always had your subcontracting ones with the days out. Now we've got a days out plus a receiving time into the equation. And the last one that I'd highlighted here, the backflush labor and quantity. So now you have always had that ability to say, I'm going to backflush materials, or you had the ability to backflush labor when you had a backflush employee. You've got more fine-tuned control to say, I only want to do the time, or I only want to do the quantity, or I want to do both the time and the quantity. And again, that's one that's probably a better 15-minute conversation in a smaller group or a separate webinar than trying to go through here. So as I said at the beginning, it wasn't going through every single feature and every new functionality that's there. The first ones were really the ones that I felt had a lot of impact to the customers that we're currently working with, and I think there's a lot of benefit in those features. So hopefully it was informative. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions, and I'll turn it back to Mr. Burns for that.
Great. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. We did have a couple questions come in. First one, when you process MRP for a single part, are subassemblies included?
Yes, they are. And you do have some control over that feature and functionality. Again, separate conversation. I can't remember where the flag is and exactly what it's called, but you do have control over that process, and will it be brought through?
Excellent, thanks. One question came in on the factors. Which one has priority, the part class or the part?
Right now, it's supposed to be the factors on the part master itself are priority. If there's no value found there, then it rolls up to the part class.
Awesome. And one last question, it's more of a general question about our customers. So of all of our customers that we've upgraded to 10, how many are using supply chain, do you think?
Well, supply chain is pretty much one of the embedded features.
Yeah.
Everyone has it. If you're touching into supplier maintenance or anything else like that, it depends on more who's doing scheduling and which one they're going to benefit from.
Perfect.
Our bigger manufacturers are going to benefit a lot from the linking of the jobs together. People that we have that make large machinery in the food industry and different areas like that, that brings, there we were always running an Excel spreadsheet on the corner or some other type of tracker over in the corner, and then having to go in and manipulate each job individually. Now I can pull them all in together and kind of shift the whole thing in unison. So that's where we're seeing the biggest benefit there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that's about it for the questions. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's always just great to sit and listen to Steve, who's an industry expert, go through some of these new features. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Please join us for our next webinar coming up on Wednesday, October 25th at noon Eastern, when we'll give an overview of the new features and benefits of Epicor's finance area within Epicor ERP 10.1. You can register on our website at www.crawford-software.com, or you can look for an upcoming email invitation that will be coming out shortly. Again, from all of us here at Crawford Software, I want to thank Steve and especially thank you all for joining us today, and have a great day.